It's Sunday, August 2, 2026. I'm Anthony Davis. Welcome to the Weekend Show, where we make the time to consider the news of the week. You can support my work and independent journalism on Substack at The Anthony Davis. Our guest today is the Executive Director of Voters of Tomorrow, a Gen Z-led organization fighting for the freedoms and futures of the next generation. Santiago, welcome to the Weekend Show.
Thank you for having me.
Great to see you. You have 11,000 plus members in more than 25 states. You organize young people to go and vote. And in the 2024 cycle, you contacted more than 34 million voters. We talk about the next generation, but you know, that generation is already here. They might be the last generation to save us and the planet and politics and everything. I mean, it's a lot of responsibility. Do you feel that because of this rise of the far right and fascism in the executive, that people are more engaged, or are younger people kind of turned off by it?
I think it's kind of both. I think people are turned off from the political conversation at all, but they are more motivated than ever before to actually grab at the institutions and grab the systems that are supposed to be working for us and actually make them work for us, because there is a recognition that simply has not happened. And that's why I love the work that we do at Voters of Tomorrow, because we capture that energy from people really across the country, many with differing ideologies, but all with a deep commitment to, like you said, our fundamental rights or fundamental freedoms and a love for democracy.
Part of the problem, though, is that a lot of younger people growing up have only known Donald Trump as president. Because even for the 4 years that he wasn't president, A, he says he should have been president, and B, he campaigned as if he was president. So, you know, we are dealing with a generation of people who think that the abnormal is normal, and that what those of us who've been around a little longer feel as being completely the antithesis of a functioning democracy. I mean, is there a chance that people are kind of organically feel like they are normalizing this kind of behavior?
I think that there's a recognition that things are not normal, right? At the same time, however, it is also very clear that normal has not worked. And I think that's in large part what we have been seeing across Generation Z, not just in how they vote, but how they behave, how they talk, their communities online. People recognize that normal has not worked, that the institutions have not worked, that the American promise that was made to us is simply unachievable in the current system. And they are looking for solutions to that. Sometimes those solutions work, sometimes they don't. But what we have seen is Gen Z really being energized, not necessarily, again, for any particular ideology, but for people who actually talk about the issues that they are experiencing and promise real solutions to those problems.
Voter turnout is not good across the board, but with young people, I know that in 2024, it was slightly lower than in 2020, but much higher than it was in 2016. I mean, how much of a problem is this, that people either don't recognize the importance of their vote, or it's too difficult to vote because of the voter suppression tactics that Republicans have employed, i.e. fewer places to vote, shorter hours to vote, and, you know, the removal of vote by mail or drop boxes or that type of thing. So from an engagement perspective, how kind of comfortable or confident are you with young people's willingness to actually get out the vote?
Yeah, listen, I think we have seen a steady increase, right? 2018 was higher than 2014. 22 was at around the same level as 2018, slightly lower. Same with 24. It was just slightly lower than the record high that we set in 2020. But we have seen sort of this trend upwards. And I think that reflects what we were just talking about. Young people are energized to actually solve the systems, but we need to show them that voting is actually a way to do that, because many of them have seen election after election, all of which have been the most important election in our lifetime, but they haven't seen anything materially change for them. So a lot of them have lost hope in sort of electoralism as a solution to our problems. And I think that's why, again, the work that Votes for Tomorrow does is so fundamental to actually mobilizing young people, because we are showing them that through their vote, there can be actual tangible results that actually improve their lives. I also think there is a deep commitment across the generation to make voting more accessible, to your point. Our Hampton University chapter, for example, established the first ever polling place on campus. And I think that shows a commitment that goes way beyond voting, but actually shows a commitment to bringing people in and making it more accessible to people who may not have the time to go and stand in line for hours, right? Who may not have the ability to take a day off work because lines are so long, or simply to miss an exam or a class. What we saw in 2022, for example, were people in the University of Michigan who were lined up until 2 or 3 a.m. because the lines were so long. And we were sending pizza, we were sending music, we were, at one point, I think we sent ponchos because it was raining, right? Doing everything that we could to keep them there. And these folks stayed, they cast their vote, they made their voice heard, and they actually had a massive impact in the results those years. And stories like that, stories that actually show that young people can make that difference, are so important to actually mobilizing young people at large.
So what are you saying when you make your contact with people? What's your in? What kind of language are you using to connect with people? And are you just pushing for them to vote for anyone, or does it have a kind of democratic leaning?
Well, you're going to get me in hot water with our entity setup. But no, I mean, we have a nonprofit arm that does general voter turnout, right? And I think that is the most fundamental mission. We just want young people to actually make their voices heard. But we also recognize that there is a fascist epidemic affecting the Republican Party. And that for any of us to succeed in actually addressing the issues that have gotten us to this point, we first need to get rid of those fascists in our government. So we also have a political action committee that pushes for candidates, advocates for candidates. And to your question, when we reach out to young people, we don't have a script, right? We don't have designated talking points. Part of what makes Votes for Tomorrow so special is we are entirely youth-led. And we trust our volunteers, our fellows, our organizers to have true, authentic conversations with voters where they can address really any concern that the voters may have, whether that is affordability and the price of gas, whether that is the war in Iran, or whether that is to bring it back to the sort of overwhelming narratives over the last few issues around young voters, which is climate change, gun violence prevention, right? Medicare for all, and healthcare. Our organizers want voters to feel like they're real people, because they are. And I think, again, preparing scripts and talking points is how a lot of candidates have failed to engage young people, because I say this all the time, but Gen Z has a really good bullshit detector. And we can't get past that. If you're not being authentic, if you're not being true to yourself, young people are going to smell that from a mile away, and they're not going to like it.
It's so true. And I think that this goes back to what you said at the very beginning, that the way it's been done previously has not worked.
Yeah.
And because I've heard some people say, oh, we just want to go back to normal. And I don't know that normal was ever a particularly good place. I mean, it wasn't fascism, but it was full of corruption, and it was, too much money in politics, and all of the things that we know, prevent people from actually getting improved public services. I think that, all we seem to have left is the vote, though. I mean, that really is an issue, isn't it? Because, the right of reply is under attack. Free speech is under attack. But the vote, as it stands, as we're talking right now, I mean, anything could change in the coming weeks, and there's plenty of evidence to say that it might. But the vote really is the most powerful form of democracy. And so, do you think young people realize quite how valuable that democratic right to a singular and free vote is?
I think they do, but at the same time, I think there are a lot of people who are dedicated to trying to erode that trust. And I think that's what we have seen over the past few elections with organizations like Turning Point USA, who
Yes.
are working incredibly hard and spending obscene amounts of money to convince young people that their vote actually does not matter, that they can actually just stay home, that it doesn't matter if Donald Trump is sending them to die in Iran, because at the end of the day, you know, those Democrats are crazy. But our work is to show young people that it matters. Our work is to show that if we lose our democracy, we have nothing left, and we have no real system to address all of the myriad of issues that are plaguing our generation, from the loneliness epidemic to the affordability crisis. Young people understand that the vote is the best way to make politicians listen to them. And yes, obviously there are money interests that are trying to get influence outside of elections. We have so many lobbyists and advocacy organizations that are spending money in support of things that are against what Gen Z believes in. But none of these folks can get into office if young people are voting against them, because as of right now, we are one of the largest voting blocs. Millennials and Gen Z are now combined the largest voting bloc. When we make our voices heard, when we cast that vote, people can't defeat us. So we just need to actually do that, beat those money interests, beat the system of corruption that has enthralled itself in our politics, and actually push forward the change that we want to see.
You mentioned Turning Point USA. Let's talk about that for just a moment, because as with a lot that goes on the right and the far right of American politics, history gets rewritten, especially in the event of somebody's death. And in the killing of Charlie Kirk, he was kind of elevated to a kind of martyrdom status in many ways, but he was a truly terrible person. I mean, it's very clever the way they positioned Turning Point, that they were encouraging open debate and free speech, and yet it was none of those things, was it? It really was going around to colleges and universities and indoctrinating people by using very kind of veiled language to convince them that, a lot of there's a kind of biblical aspect to it, obviously, but also there was no separation of church and state in that work, right? And so they were brainwashing people into seeing that the Republican Party, and certainly Christian nationalism, was kind of where it's at. Just tell me your thoughts on that, because it is something that has, I guess, made your kind of activism quite difficult, is that with the funding that they had and have, because of course Erica Kirk continues to run the operation, although it's changed a little since, but it's a lot to kind of come up against, considering that they are so well funded, that they do have this incredible media machine, and that Charlie Kirk himself was a rather I don't want to credit him with anything really, but he was a kind of operator. He knew how to play people and the system right up until a second before his death.
Yeah, listen, and I'll be the first to say, right, he shouldn't have been killed, and political violence must be condemned from every side every time.
Sure.
However, I do think we forget that the Southern Poverty Law Center has recognized Turning Point USA as a hate group, and that this idea that they were just promoting free speech, or that they are this organization energizing debate, is simply not true. Charlie Kirk himself is responsible for me receiving hundreds of death threats, right? He was not a good person. Turning Point USA is not a good organization. But like you said, they have so much money. They have so much money, in fact, that Turning Point USA nonprofit arm by itself raised and spent more money than every single left-leaning youth organization combined in 2024. When you add up all the organizations targeting young people on the right, they spent over $1.2 billion to persuade young people that their vote didn't matter, and to tell young men that Donald Trump was the one that wasn't going to send them to war, which clearly was a lie. So I think it is very important that we recognize that this is a real threat, and that they are still on college campuses, There are now Republican governors who are creating formal state partnerships with TPUSA, which I will just say, not an accident that TP, Turning Point, toilet paper, but they're creating formal state partnerships with Turning Point USA to bring the organization to every high school in their states. We have seen this in Alabama. We have seen it in Indiana. We have seen it in so many states. We don't have that on the left. We don't have people who are willing to give youth organizations $1 billion to do this work. And that is why, honestly, we are so proud when we do beat them, which is the majority of the times. People forget, because young people shifted to the right in 2024, that Gen Z was still the bluest generation and the bluest age group. In 2021, Turning Point invested millions of dollars to try and kick Gavin Newsom out of office, right? Voters Tomorrow, we didn't have a penny, but we organized across college campuses entirely through volunteers, and we beat them. We actually grew Governor Newsom's margins because we know that young people agree with us on the issues that matter. They might not recognize it all the time, but that is also because Turning Point, to your point, has been very smart in how they do this. They are not going to young people and saying, hey, we got to give billionaires a bigger tax cut. We got to give church the control of the government. They are simply trying to fill the loneliness that so many young people feel. They are providing community. And us on the left have failed to do that. We have pushed so many people out of our coalition through really judging them for not being as educated or as engaged. And that is why Voters Tomorrow is following a really similar model. We're trying to make engagement fun. We're trying to make communities that actually feel like communities. It's not the group of people you go talk politics with. They're your friends. They're the people who you go to happy hour with, who you watch a movie with, right? They're people who you come to a meeting, not because of the meeting itself, because you want to spend time with them. And that is a fundamental difference from how engagement has traditionally been done. We're not bringing candidates who say, hey, you got to vote for this person because the other person sucks and because this is the most important election of our lifetime. We're telling young people, you can mobilize your own community and you can have fun while doing it and accomplish something good, right? That is really the only way that we're fighting back. That is how Voters of Tomorrow has been fighting back and has been serving as the first line of defense against Turning Point USA in campuses across the country. And that is how we're going to beat them, bring back our youth coalition, and actually kick all of these fascists out of office.
There is a kind of organic movement against republicanism currently because people can see how lavish this presidency has become, right? And even something as simple and symbolic as him kind of painting everything gold in the Oval Office and then getting himself a plane that America didn't need, and the arch and the ballroom and everything. I mean, it is so gauche. And meanwhile, people are really struggling, especially young people, and with, jobs being an issue, not least the cost of living. It is such a contrast, isn't it, to see this kind of king in his castle wanting everything to be gilt-edged, and in reality, people can't even afford fish sticks. And so I'm very much of the opinion that he is doing a lot of the work for you in many ways. But do you feel that you have to kind of share that message too? Like, how much of your engagement is actually talking about Donald Trump, both as a failure in terms of a president, but also as a fascist and as a dollar store dictator, as I like to call him?
Yeah, listen, and I completely agree with that description. I think Donald Trump is doing a lot of work to push young people away from himself and Republicans, but that does not mean that those people are coming to Democrats. And that is a distinction that is very important, especially in an election cycle like the one we're in, because we're really not competing with Republicans. They have done an excellent job at pushing young people away. We're really competing with the couch because, again, young people have lost so much faith in the democratic system and in all the institutions. We have seen them fail over and over and over again. So what Voters of Tomorrow is doing is, yes, obviously educating young people about what is happening right now. We got to make sure that they know that the consequences of the decisions that were made in 2024, But our priority is, again, not to point and say the other guy sucks. Our priority is to tell them what we're going to do for them if we give our candidates power, if we are able to kick all these people out of office. How are we actually going to bring prices down? How are we actually going to end foreign conflict? How are we going to provide healthcare to people so that people aren't going broke because of a cancer diagnosis, right? We do not want, nor do we have the time really, to tell young people about how much Donald Trump sucks, because we could do that for hours up and hours up and hours. But we do have the time to make very concrete arguments about steps that young people can take to improve their own lives, and how voting for a candidate that will actually fight for them is fundamental to that process.
It's interesting, isn't it, that Republicans and Democrats, I'm talking about people now as opposed to statistics, they actually want the same things, like what you just described, not spending money on foreign wars and being able to afford to put food on the table and gas in the car, and feeling safe, being able to go out and feel safe. None of these issues are democratic issues, are they? They are issues of humanity, which suggests to me that the problem is actually the leadership and representation. That is where the miscommunication is, and that the people that have traditionally stood up to represent people in whatever party have kind of failed at providing what it is that the majority of people need. Because nationally, when polled, and this happens time and time again, America is quite progressive. It is quite liberal. People don't want to see abductions on the streets or executions of American citizens. They don't want there to be a kind of national abortion ban. And these, so when it comes to the issues themselves, how do you see people react to those?
Yeah, I mean, listen, we call what you just referred to as the cycle of disengagement. Young people oftentimes don't vote because they don't feel represented, and people in office don't feel like they need to represent young people because they don't vote, right? And one of the things I'm proudest of is not just Versus Tomorrow, but as a youth coalition, we have made so much progress on both ends of that cycle. As I said at the beginning, we have seen youth voter turnout steadily increase. Well, we have also seen elected officials recognize that and start making a significant effort to bring young people in. I think people do very much forget that President Biden did a ton of engagement for young people. He was convening meetings with youth advocacy organizations. He was constantly engaging youth organizations and designing some of his core policies. And did we receive everything that we were asking for? No, but that's politics. That's government. You never get everything that you have, especially when you don't have the power that you need to push all of these big, ambitious policies. But that's not to say we didn't still get the first gun violence prevention bill in 30 years. We still didn't get the largest investment into fighting climate change in history. And those two were driven by young people. I think when we talk about the way to represent young people, there's a lot of conversations about what Congress has to look like. It really isn't about the age or the gender or how people look, their race. It really is about the age of their politics and the age of their ideology. And we have seen over the past few years, young people be very clear about what they want. Like you said, from a completely nonpartisan lens. What has failed is that engagement and that communication, because young people simply are not hearing what elected officials are doing for them. And elected officials are, in all honesty, doing a pretty bad job at actually putting it out there. And again, part of what we do at Voters of Tomorrow is try and connect those dots. We will work with elected officials to try and fine-tune their message and help them organize in their districts. We have held town halls with high schoolers for members of Congress, where these high schoolers can ask directly to their members of Congress what they are doing. And the members of Congress can have actual conversations with people who are not yet, the majority of them, not yet old enough to vote.
Yeah.
We help voters make better demands of their elected leaders. And we do that through a variety of ways. But like our California chapter, for example, authored a bill to avoid another ICE shooting, another ICE murder from happening by making it a crime for federal agents to prevent first responders from providing aid to someone who is injured, right?
Yes.
That bill is currently in the state legislature. And we are working so hard to make sure that it gets through because, again, it is providing a voice to the concerns that young people in California have shown. And I hope that we're able to make this a national bill next time that we hold power.
Yeah.
So it is really, again, to go back to the cycle, working on both ends. We need young people to be louder and clearer and more engaged about what they want and what they need, and to use their power and leverage that vote that is so important that we were talking about. But we also need elected officials to recognize the influence that young people have and to actually be responsive to it, because otherwise we're going to kick them out of office.
Tell me, is hereditary voting still a thing? Because, when I was growing up, you kind of just voted the way your parents voted. That was kind of a given. And, I came from a conservative family and they kind of expected me, and their argument, admittedly it was in England, which was a slightly different political, landscape, but
just a little bit saner, not much.
A little bit sane, right, but still pretty crazy. We have had like 8 prime ministers recently, but anyway. But they would say, the conservatives are much better with money because they've been in business. So that was basically the argument back in the day. And of course, it didn't really make a huge amount of sense in reality. And as I grew up and I learned that none of that was true and that trickle-down economics was a fallacy, and that a lot of these people, and certainly in America, Republicans are always the government that increase the debt and increase the deficit and don't bring infrastructure week around anytime soon. And they don't spend on public services. They just make cuts. And so, it took me a while, but eventually I realized that none of that stuff that I was told by my parents growing up was actually true. And then when I was old enough to challenge them, I successfully changed with my mum. My dad had lost cause, but I managed to change her and move her politics, where she became engaged. She stopped reading the wrong newspapers, and she actually learned that her voice mattered because, she grew up at a time when even women voting was, as we're seeing now with conservative men wanting to control women's votes, it was still kind of the man of the house that decided who the political party would be. So how is hereditary voting playing out in 2026?
Yeah, listen, I think young people, by and large, have completely disassociated from any traditional partisan breakdown. Right. I think, as you mentioned, young people are very progressive. People at large are very progressive. But young people don't feel an obligation to either party. They don't feel an obligation to the party their parents supported. In fact, many of them are kind of repelled from it, right? I think young people, again, are looking for people who are authentic, who come off as real, and who come off as caring and actually will address the issues that they care about. I think that's why you see people like Zoran Mamdani in New York be very successful with young people. Because not only does he come across as so relatable, but he has been single focused on actually addressing the things that New Yorkers, specifically young New Yorkers, have been calling out as issues for so long. You saw a lot of crossover from Trump voters who came out in support of Mamdani, which makes no sense if you look at it from a political ideology sense, but makes so much sense when you look at it as new ideas. These are people throwing the sink at the kitchen wall. They are desperate for change. They are desperate for a system that will actually work for them. They saw that in Donald Trump and it failed. It came back and it bit us all in the ass. But we also see that in New York with Mayor Mamdani. We also see it in Virginia with Abigail Spanberger and in New Jersey with Mikey Sherrill. All of them had a not just relatability, but were completely focused on actually materially improving people's lives. And they saw really good results from it. Not because they were Democrats, not because they were progressives or moderates or centrists or socialists or whatever label you want to throw on people, but because they cared. And I think if we can show young people that there are politicians who care, that there are politicians who are willing to not only take them seriously, but make them partners in government, like we have seen across these states, then we will see young people all of a sudden come back into the system and start believing again. Not because we need to hug the institutions tight and say, no, we can't let them go, but because there will be a recognition by the people in power that the institutions have not worked and that we don't need to tear them down, but we can't keep them as they are. We got to think of them in new ways. We got to actually change things to make them work for young people. And when we do that, young people come back and they show up and they're excited about politics, as again, we have seen across so many elections.
We need candidates who are reformers. And you mentioned Zoran Mamdani. I mean, he's a mayor. He can't run for the presidency because he's not American born. But, you know, I've had a bunch of democratic socialists on the show recently. And last week we had Francesca Hong on, and she, I mean, again, so inspiring and coming from just a regular place, like being a regular, authentic person without airs and graces, but with genuine skin in the game. And I do think, as you described, that really is the differential. We're talking about young people and engagement, but a lot of the candidates that running for office are getting younger themselves. And I mean, this is part, I think, of the draw for young people, that when we're looking for politicians to connect with, the ones that are younger and a little more maybe social media savvy and a little more sweary always helps, doesn't it? You know, people who are just like regular people and are not putting on an act to play the role of a politician, or in Trump's case, playing the role of a president on television, and us having to kind of deal with the consequences of that. So do you think that really is important? And the reason that Mamdani has been so successful is because he's not another aging white man who has kind of made money in business and then can't think of anything else to do, but craves power, so runs for office.
Yeah, listen, I think it's a big part of it, right? I don't think it's the only part of it. Again, I think the age of people's politics matter much more than their actual age. But it definitely plays a role in how young people perceive government. And honestly, we have incredible partners at Run for Something, for example, who are dedicated to electing young people. We have so many incredible leaders across the country who may not get the recognition that Zoran Mamdani gets, because obviously they're not the mayor of New York City, but they are the mayors of their local towns. They are in city councils. They are in state legislatures, and they are changing politics for the better. They are bringing in a new generation of thought, a lot of new energy, so many new ideas. And has that necessarily trickled into the national conversation? Not fully, but we are starting to see it. We see the conversation shifting, and we see results in those state legislatures, in those city councils, start to reflect what young people have been asking for. So again, I think age is a factor. I think the age of politics is a much bigger one, but it definitely plays a role.
But being a troublemaker is helpful as well, isn't it? You know, and it almost goes beyond the John Lewis good trouble quote, doesn't it? Because it's the people that kind of seek to be a little rebellious against the establishment that are getting increased support. And arguably that's how Donald Trump presented himself in 2016. You know, I'm not a politician. We're going to root out all the corruption. I mean, the irony with hindsight is not lost on us, but it was still a powerful message at the time, being anti-establishment. And you know, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is another example of, you know, she's been at it longer now and she has built up a huge following. She's excellent on social media. She speaks the language of modernity, but also the language of authenticity. And I love the videos where she gets home at the end of a long day and she like flops back on the sofa and she holds her phone up and she just talks to the camera. And she says, this is the shit that went down in Congress today and what she's had to deal with. It's very, very powerful. And I hope that she is kind of leading a movement of politicians who are in it for the right reasons rather than for themselves.
Yeah, listen, I love those videos if for no reason other than for the occasional dog cameos that pop up.
Yeah.
But no, I mean, I think you're exactly right. I think that there is a new generation of politics coming into place. And that's kind of what I mean with this trickling in from the state and local level. At the same time, it is so important that we don't descend into sort of the trick that in many cases the corporate media is playing and pitching people in our coalition against each other, right? I love Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez. I think she's awesome. I love Mayor Mamdani. I think he's awesome. At the same time, we are in a Big Tent party. And I think that it is so dangerous when we say like only Mamdani can win or only AOC can win. I think we need to find people who are good fits for their districts. And both of them are an incredible fit for theirs. And they do such a great job at being that voice for so many people in other districts who simply do not live in a geographic area where we've made the progress to win yet, right? I think they give a voice to so many people in the deepest, reddest parts of like Alabama or Oklahoma or West Virginia who are desperate for a champion and have found it because they are so good at social media or because they are so good at like just speaking off the cuff, which is so important because like you said, we don't want people playing politician. We want people who actually are in it for the right reasons. So you are absolutely correct. And I think there is a big disestablishment energy across the country because like I said, institutions have failed. And a lot of, I will say, older style politicians have hugged the establishment and have hugged those institutions and have said, we can't do anything. We just got to protect them and we're going to have to deal with it, but we got to protect the institutions. Whereas I think you correctly point out both Trump's pitch to just like tear them all down or AOC's or Mamdani's pitch to reform them have been effective. We have seen that pitch so many times and there is clearly a superior version of it. And that is the one that doesn't require tearing apart our democracy and embracing fascism.
Because sometimes these slogans can backfire, and defund the police was an example of that, whereby nobody really wanted to defund the police. They wanted to just to reallocate funds into community policing and into mental health services and to take the money away from like cops with big guns and big trucks, that kind of militarized policing, which doesn't serve anybody. Do you think that that is a problem? Because, you know, we saw that recently with the I think it was the deputy chair of the Democratic Socialists, wasn't it, who went on Fox and was basically asked a bunch of questions and it backfired terribly, where she was like, yep, we want to abolish the Senate and we want to get rid of this and we want to get rid of that. And they obviously weaponized those answers to basically say that all Democrats are communists and that they have these radical views. And it's simply not based in truth.
Hey, listen, I think the SA would have a much better relationship with the Democratic Party if Democrats were actually communists. But no, I mean, listen, I think in what will come as a shock to absolutely no one, I'm a bit of a nerd. And I think this is one of those cases where we kind of have to go back to the most fundamental piece of politics, which is if you're explaining, you're losing. We have been talking for the last 40 minutes about how we need candidates to speak like normal people. And if you're pulling from your big book of ideologies with 1,000 different theories, that is not something that most people have the luxury of embracing and being aware of. And I think it's just important that we be realistic, right? As much as I wish that everyone in this country could spend so much time identifying their own belief system and identifying an ideology that they want to embrace, the reality is that so many people cannot do that because they are working 4 or 3 or 4, even 4 jobs to pay the bills because they have no childcare and have to take care of their kids, right? Because they are having to work while in school because it is so expensive to go to school these days. And it is unfair to them if we continue creating policies that require a doctorate in political science to understand. I think, to your point, part of why Mayor Mamdani and AOC have been so successful from a very progressive angle is because they are not sort of embattling themselves in these fights over slogans. They are talking about making the buses run faster. They are talking about fixing the streets. They are talking about giving people healthcare and providing childcare and bringing down the cost of groceries. They are talking about things that not only affect everyone, but that everyone can understand. Does that mean that we do not have to address policing in America? No, absolutely not. We still need to do that, right? But I don't think that spending an entire campaign cycle focused on that is necessarily productive when we know that slogans like defund the police have really made that conversation toxic. Whereas if we just say what you just said, let's redirect funding to social services, I can almost guarantee you everyone would be for it. Because it is a common sense idea that most people understand and can agree with.
Yeah. It's the branding and the marketing of these ideas that is where Republicans seem to have the lead. And part of that is because they have a much more simplistic attitude towards policy and politics.
They're also shameless liars, but...
And shameless liars. And they also spend an awful lot of time kind of rewriting the narrative on democratic policies, whereas Democrats don't seem to spend as much time correcting the record of what Republicans have said. And that is a problem, isn't it? How much do you find that you're having to correct the propaganda and educate people about the propaganda that Democrats aren't communists, for example, and that they don't want to do away with prisons? You know, that actually, if you get into the nuance of these subjects, because that's, of course, where all of the answers lies, in the detail, that when you get into the weeds, you realize, of course, it requires a little more critical thinking than just slogans, but that actually there is a whole kind of education campaign to be done to re-educate people that have fallen into the trap of the MAGA propaganda.
Yeah, and I will say, to your point, like, this is why I am so insistent that Democrats need to stop attacking each other and start attacking the fascists currently running our government. But I think it is a very important thing, and it is something that we spent a significant amount of time doing, right? Although we don't frame it as correcting the record or here's what this actually means, because no one wants to feel like they are being over-explained, like they have a misunderstanding. No one wants to be made to feel stupid. What they want to know is, again, how you're going to actively improve their lives. So our approach is to grab all of these policies, but instead of using the Republican framing and saying, no, you were lied to, or no, that is wrong, we talk about what those policies would actually have as an impact for them, right? If we're talking about Medicare for all, sure, your taxes might go up a little, but that little is nothing compared to how much money you would save with your deductibles and your premiums, right? We want to talk about how all of our policies will actually improve people's lives, not about whatever the Republican culture war issue or policy issue of the week is and whatever Tucker Carlson is screaming on his podcast. We don't care because, honestly, the majority of young people don't care. They care about how they're going to afford food next week, and that's what we want to talk to them about.
Just explain how you communicate, because obviously social media is where a lot of it is at. And I presume that it would be TikTok and Instagram and I don't know what other things there are, because I kind of locked my phone in a box a long while ago. But what are the tactics for communicating? Because, you know, my friend Tara McGowan at Courier Newsroom is brilliant at this, you know, really understands how to focus a news campaign, connect with people, and it's done in a very kind of simple but impactful way. So, and I know you've been a bit of a star of Courier yourself recently, actually. So maybe tell us about that and tell us about how you use social media to get the message across.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, Tara and her team are exceptional and doing such important work. I think, like you mentioned, we were on Kerr a few days ago, pledging $1 million to mobilizing young people this fall, and social media undoubtedly plays a role. And we do so much work, not just to provide information on social media, but to use it as an engagement opportunity. One of my favorite things to do in 2024 was to do all sorts of different phone banks. We had phone banking for introverts. We had grandparents and grandkids. We had teachers and students. All of these in sort of very creative attempts to try and bring people together. Because like I mentioned earlier, I think the biggest opportunity for youth organizing is addressing the very real loneliness epidemic that our generation has been experiencing. So even though we do a lot of on social media, the bulk of our work is in providing that community to young people, whether that is by holding a happy hour and bringing people together, whether that is by doing a film festival like our chapter in Raleigh is doing, whether that is by organizing scavenger hunts or soccer matches like Mayor Mamdani did during his campaign. Our approach is really to bring people into a room, not because they agree with us on the politics, but because they are looking for a fun activity that they can do with their friends, because they're looking for a place where they can meet new friends. And once they are in the room, once they have a reason to come back, then we'll hit them with the politics. Then we'll start talking about why voting matters. But we need to give them a reason to come back first. And while social media is a great way to sort of boost those things, you really just cannot replace the value of having people be in the same room, of having that in-person conversation. And that's really where the bulk of that $1 million that we have pledged, and hopefully we are able to raise more money and invest even more in this effort, because that's where it's going to go, in building those communities of trust and relationships, and making sure that young people understand that fighting for democracy does not have to be this like nerdy, boring thing that you go and do with your debate club buddies. That it is a fun thing where you can not only make friends, but bring your friends and have a drink and watch a movie and make a big impact and help save democracy.
It is okay to be a nerd as well, though, of course.
Santiago. Oh, listen,
you and I both know nerd. Very well.
I am a proud nerd.
So are you focusing your outreach in specific states? Because I know that you've been focusing on Iowa. But just tell me about the strategy. I mean, is it a case of looking at swing states and deciding that there are younger people there to reach and who maybe haven't voted historically, or it's their first time, and giving them some support to do that?
It both is simple and is very complex, because yes, the core of the strategy is looking at the places where young people can have the most impact. But again, in 2024, the left-leaning youth space was outspent by $1 billion. So we don't have the luxury of duplicating efforts. And thus we really try and work with our partners to identify where are gaps and where can each of us fill those gaps. In this case, Iowa was a glaring one, because not only are there 3 congressional seats where young people could fundamentally alter the results, but there is also a must-win Senate race if we want to take the Senate back. And there are so many young people who are ready to be mobilized, who are ready to be turned out, who are ready to turn out their friends and their peers. And we are so excited because we are actively recruiting for campus fellows across universities in the state, who are going to be current students at those universities, who know the space, who are part of the community, and who can mobilize their peers through all of these sort of community building tactics by hosting happy hours, by hosting movie nights, and also by doing the traditional organizing that we have seen succeed before. Tabling and voter registration remains so important, but doesn't work by itself. So we are mobilizing all of these folks. We obviously have chapters who are really the backbone of our organizing program. And they are, whether they are high school students, whether they are college students, whether they are just people in the same geographic area who meet once a week at their local library. All these people are so fundamental in giving young people a voice and showing other young people that they together have a voice. So We're working in Iowa, we're working in Virginia, we're working in California, we're working in all the places where young people can have an impact on the races. And we're working with our partners both to support their efforts and to have them support ours, because we cannot beat TPUSA and Young Americans for Liberty and all those crazy people on the right by themselves. We got to do it as a coalition.
It's funny how those groups accuse Democrats of indoctrinating people into transgender for everyone, or whatever it happens to be this week, and yet their fundamental indoctrination is that of Christian nationalism, which is neither Christianity or particularly patriotic. I want to finally talk about the F word. We've said it a few times on this show, and that is fascism. And we've said it in kind of not a flippant way, but you and I, because we clearly are of the same mindset here, that we've kind of gotten used to the fact that there has been a fascist takeover of the US government, that institutions have been deconstructed, that the whole Project 2025 plan has come to fruition, including the mass deportations, which have extended to mass abductions, and in the case of, a dozen people now, murders. We are, I hate to say we're normalizing it, but we are certainly adjusting to these stories that we hear every day, and also the increased the kind of grievance associated with these policies. And obviously people like Stephen Miller and Russ Vought and even Pete Hegseth are at the heart of some of this terrible stuff, both domestically and abroad. Do you think young people recognize how unusual this is in America's political history? Not that it hasn't happened before. Of course, the Jim Crow era wasn't that long ago, but this is something that almost goes beyond that, because you have the racism and you have the abuse of minorities, but you also have the cruelty that is so very public, and the value of human life that seems to have kind of lost all of its value, especially with Donald Trump talking in the most abusive language. I mean, hosting the White House Correspondents' Dinner and accusing everybody of being, fake news and everything. I mean, talk about, picking your audience. I mean, these are not normal times. So do young people recognize how serious this is, how dangerous this is, and how unprecedented this is, and how historians in the future are going to look back on this period as being probably one of the darkest times in America's history?
Yeah, I think young people understand that this is abnormal and bad, but I don't know if they understand the really contrast with what has happened before. Because when you look at history, you see a lot of very bad episodes, right? You mentioned a few of them. But then you also see a big turn, and you see best of people. You see people come together, whether that's for the moon landing, whether that's for the fall of the Berlin Wall. You see all of these really dark episodes sort of bookended by a coming together moment. And I think part of the defining aspect of Gen Z's politics, and John de la Volpe makes this argument in his book, Fight, is that we have seen so many of those dark episodes without ever seeing that positive bookend, without ever seeing people coming together in the same way that they have in the past. So obviously, not to say that like we've had it worse than other generations. I think there's an argument that can be made. It is not an argument that I think is necessarily worth having. But there is a very clear difference in the fact that other generations, whether they have had it better or worse, have always seen these big moments of unity that have simply missed Gen Z. And I think because of that, there is, I think, a hope that that is eventually going to come for us. And even though there's a recognition that what we are experiencing is both abnormal and bad, there is this underlying hope that it will eventually be bookended by something just as abnormal, but in a positive way. I myself, I'm of the idea that these big moments don't just happen, that they are created by the people, and that if we want that big positive moment to come for us, we need to work for it. And that is why me and I have the best team at Verse Tomorrow are so committed to the work, because we need to make this happen for young people. We need to give Gen Z that moment of unity and that moment of hope, because an entire life of tragedy is simply really bad for people's mental health and for like enjoyment of life. If we want young people not just to be active participants in civic life, but active participants in life overall, we got to give them that, and we got to keep working for it. And it's not just going to be young people. It's going to be all of us together that come together, fix this era that we're in, and give young people that like ray of sunshine that we have been missing.
We're just 3 months from the midterms. It's going to come around really fast as we enter August now. There's a lot of talk of Trump, with a plan, whether it be cancelling elections, War Powers Act. He's obviously laying the groundwork for, claiming that it was fraudulent if he and his candidates lose. And we know that the legislatures are kind of prepared for this, and that a lot of states are doing a lot of work to try and ring fence, despite Trump trying to federalize elections and failing, that they are trying to kind of ring fence any interference from the central government. It's just so crazy that I'm having to say this stuff out loud. Trump goes on TV and makes a national address about voter fraud and blames the Chinese, and yet he is the one who is at the heart of all of this stuff. And, we saw that with the last insurrection on January 6th. So he obviously has form. But do you think that the vote will be free and fair? And do you think that we're going to, because young people are obviously at the heart of this, and I'm hoping that Trump and his team have kind of forgotten about young people, and they'll go under the radar, and they'll be the ones voting because they're so focused on, undocumented immigrants or dead people, that they'll forget about all the young people voting. But do you think that we are headed towards a midterm election season that actually will come off, and people will get that free vote as they are promised?
I think that the same thing that makes our election system so frustrating is part of what makes it particularly resilient to interference.
Yes.
Because we do not have a central election authority. We don't even have necessarily central state election authorities, right? Like, we obviously have laws and election administrators, but each election is really run at the local level, with thousands upon thousands of regular people who volunteer to go work the polls, who volunteer to count the ballots, who volunteer to make sure that the ballots are counted accurately. And that is oftentimes very difficult to deal with, because we also have this sort of patchwork of laws. We have some states that require voter ID. We have some states that have voting for felons who have completed their sentences, and states that will throw you back in jail for voting, right? But it also makes it very difficult for any singular person or any singular thought group to interfere with the results without it being noticed, with the count being altered without people realizing, because it would require the complicity of so many people, many of whom are, the vast majority of whom, they may be Republicans, but they're not election stealers. And that gives me so much confidence in our elections. The fact that they are run by average people like you or me, the fact that they are run by many young people who are poll workers, it gives me so much hope.
Yeah. Well, Brad Raffensperger, I suppose, is an example of that, right? Where he was asked to find just one more vote than Trump had in order to win. And he was like, this is not the way it's done. Okay, listen, I'm so grateful to you for not just for today, but for the work that you do. And you clearly have an ability to understand what it is that people need, not what they want, because I don't think people really know what they want, but what they need, right? And to be able to serve that up. And so listen, I wish you every continued success with the work that you do and the outreach that you do and the activism that you do. And let's come back and talk again after the midterms and see how we have fared. But for now, I'm so grateful to you, Santiago Mayer. Thanks for joining The Weekend Show.
Thank you for having me.
I'm Anthony Davis. Don't forget to support me and independent journalism on Substack at The Anthony Davis. I'll come back next Sunday with a brand new special guest and more factual news to discuss on the 5 Minute News Weekend Show with Midas Touch.